Written by Eustacia, 22. In such a small country like Singapore, land is as precious as gold dust. Even though every square inch seems to fall into place effortlessly, the invisible hand of the Urban Redevelopment Authority is behind every blade of grass in Singapore, even making provisions for changing urban needs far into the future. The modernizing impetus is seen in motion continually, and it goes without saying that the old public housing blocks fall under the purveyance of the URA. Public housing, commonly referred to as HDB's Housing Development Board in Singapore, comes with a 99-year-old lease. Other than facilitating urban planning, this also ensures that the house will eventually come under URA's ownership, in the case the occupant passes away with no claimant on the property. These concrete spaces are full of human drama, enacted in parallel yet self-contained bubbles. No one really cares for others anymore. Even if one hears screaming, it is quite likely that no police will be called. It is not characteristic of people here to easily form connections with others. Oh yes, it is quite common for neighbors to remain strangers, even after living in close proximity for years. Buddhism believes that the mind habits that one forms in this lifetime determines our suffering or liberation after death. The mental practice that one is accustomed to finds a continuity in death. This is why ghosts are seen costumed in articles of clothing they wore in life, or how they continue to do the same job or action they used to do. A pointless reenactment of an action for all eternity, and a conflation of a person's life into a singular dimension. This story took place in a vacant HDB block in Singapore that was sitting pretty for demolishment. My friend and I, tired of being mall rats, would occasionally enter these vacant blocks after school to have a cigarette. So it went on a certain Wednesday afternoon, bored of the few options for entertainment privy to us in Singapore. We took off for a vacant block in an old estate in Red Hill. We entered the dusty lift and randomly chose level 5. Most of the houses are padlocked, so we just stood by the corridor, looking out towards a cluster of similarly vacant lots within the estate. Just as the conversation dulls to a lull, the squeaking of a 2-wheelbarrow, the kind used by Karung Guni men who go around the estates collecting old clothing and newspaper for resale. The metallic noise sounded overhead, along with a familiar yet spine-tingling drawl of the rag and bone man as he announced his presence. Karung Guni. We turned to each other, fear mirrored in the widening of our eyes. Without a word, we rushed to the elevator. As it makes its slow descent from the top floors, another disquieting detail of the ordeal. As the elevator reached the 10th floor, we heard a clang. It was the unmistakable sound of steel as it hit each step of the stairs. The Karung Guni man, or whatever the entity he is, was coming down the stairs with his wares. 9th floor, clang, 8th, 7th, 6th. From our peripheral vision, we could see the beginnings of a pair of rusting wheels and 2 downtrodden sandals as they move with measured steps. 5th floor. We hurried in the elevator with palpitating hearts and started storming the close button with our fingers. We can now see half the body of the Karung Guni man, clad in faded trousers and the classic white buttoned-up shirt of middle-aged men. As the doors shut, we took one last glance out the narrowing glass windows of the lift. The Karung Guni man had stopped moving, visually decapitated as he stood midway on the stairs in the last section before the elevator descended. We stood all the way at the back of the elevator, chilled in our hearts and desperately evading the phantom Karung Guni man, counting down the sounds as the lift doors took its time to close. The button was pressed for the 1st floor, but with a rickety stop it arrived at the 4th floor and opened its doors. Nothing would make it budge. We reluctantly stepped out of the elevator and with trepidation made our descent by foot. As the staircase was narrow, we were forced to walk in single file, anxious to put distance between us and the warped time dimension of the building. We took to whispering as we did not want to attract attention to ourselves. Our shadows ran ahead of us in front of the setting sun. "At the second floor," I said. "We're almost there." There was no reply, but I thought nothing of it as we maintained a tense state of silence so far. It was only when I reached the first floor that I realized that I could only see one shadow on the floor. Mine. A slow, dawning sense of dread came over me as I remembered all those cautionary tales about not looking over your shoulder to keep the spiritual flame on your shoulder lit. It is said that ghosts are afraid of fire, and that you should do nothing to extinguish the flames on your head and shoulders. This is why people are told to never turn if your name is called on a lonely street in the dark, as doing so will dampen the fire. I continued walking straight in silence, with death in my heart. It was only after I crossed the boundaries of the old estate that I dared to look back at the darkening abandoned block. Just faintly, on the third floor, I could make out the silhouette of a boy in school uniform, with the unmistakable blue straps of a school bag so familiar to me. He looked sadly outwards, trapped within an alternate dimension, created by the pull of memories and the weight of bygone human experience, with the Karung Guni man. Thank you for listening. You can probably handle another horror story, right?